everyone. I'm Danielle Ofri, Editor-in-Chief of Bellevue Literary Review, and we are so excited to welcome you to the premiere of Reading the Body, Poetry, Dance, and Recovery. Reading the Body is a co-production of Bellevue Literary Review, this is Bellevue Literary Review, and the Paige Fraser Foundation. As such, I am very pleased to introduce my co-host tonight, Paige Fraser.
Hello.
Well, we are very happy to have you here, Paige. And, Bellevue Literary Review is a journal of creative writing that publishes fiction, poetry, and nonfiction about health, illness, and healing. And we've worked with the Paige Fraser Foundation before. And Paige, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the Paige Fraser Foundation. What is it?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I am the Chief Artistic Officer and Program Director for Dance. And the Paige Fraser Foundation was founded by Lesma Fraser in 2017. And our mission supports community through performing arts and wellness. We currently offer free workshops and events in dance, theater, music, visual arts, traditional, folk arts, and wellness. And we just recently started offering classes for Tai Chi and healthcare workers. So we have expanded quite a bit since our inception in 2017, from focusing on just dance to now all of the performing arts and wellness opportunities.
That is so wonderful to hear. I mean, it's really, for those of you who don't know the Paige Fraser Foundation, it's really an amazing resource based in the Bronx with very tight, community roots, and is really branching out. And the whole new project with healthcare workers is really something very appreciated. Tonight's theme is recovery, and this is BLR's recovery issue. And, we planned this theme actually before the COVID pandemic. And we thought about it as a very sort of broad-based interpretation of the idea of recovery. But by the time we were actually reading submissions and pulling the issue together, the world was entirely different, and recovery taken on quite a bit more urgency. And Paige, maybe you could tell us a little bit about, when you think about recovery from a dancer's perspective, what comes to mind?
I was really excited about this theme, especially after, we've pushed through the pandemic, not being able to do the things we love as a dancer, being in a studio, moving my body, sharing energy with other dancers. All of that was kind of taken away during the pandemic. And then we slowly started returning back to theaters and public spaces and using dance studios again. So when I thought of recovery, that was the first thing that came to mind, is how dancers, artists were recovering post-pandemic, and what that looked like for us. A lot of us, prior to the pandemic, we would just push through, right? If we had an injury, if we were sick, if we had a death in the family, we would push through, we would persevere. And as necessary as that skill is needed, it also it can be a detriment to us, because we're pushing through so much that it leads to burnout, fatigue, injury, and you're missing out on a lot of important things in your personal life. So for me, one of the ways I look at this theme of recovery is how dancers are taking the liberty and making the choices that they need to make in order to live a more balanced and healthier life. And then also another avenue that I looked at it from, another lens, was recovering from loss. And I can talk a little bit more about that later, but recovery definitely, it's very broad and it's very subjective per artist. And that's what I'm really excited about with this film, because each artist looked at it and dissected it in a different and unique way that was personal to them.
Yeah, and so tonight we're bringing dance and poetry together. Now, on the surface, these two art forms feel very different. One is on the stage, one is on the page, but I think you'll see how naturally they fit together. For this performance, we at BLR chose 4 poems of BLR poets published in our recovery issue. We gave them to 4 dancers. And the dancers used these words to create original works of movement set to music that was composed especially for this event. These have all been woven together into a short film integrating poetry, dance, music, spoken word, and American Sign Language. So we'll screen the film with you right now and then rejoin you afterwards with some guests to discuss the film and the topics that it raises. So please now enjoy the premiere of Reading the Body, Poetry, Dance, and Recovery.
How do I move through grief? I recently lost a relative that was very close to me, and it was very sudden, and of course took a few days off to process and go through that, but it's so in our nature as artists to keep going. My piece will definitely be tapping into the process of recovering through grief, through loss, and also accepting that person is still with me and just in a different way.
After nearly 7 years clean. I don't know how I did it. Loved you all those years in the quiet landscape of a burning vineyard, of a toppling mountain, of a drowned seascape, and had stayed attentive, at ease, hands behind my back, waiting for the soft hook following go, and the on and on insanity of day after day, of the hand reaching for the other hand, shaking it for its own pleasure, checking for the rhythmic music of my own pulse. And I don't know how I lived for myself, all those years lying on the cold surface of a man's bed, claiming Messiah, flesh of my flesh, and the steam of golden light escaping from him. I can't resist you. That velvet head lying on my chest, soft breath, and the unprotected extension of my hand to your bulging hand, non-sated, hungry and never really safe. I sit and think of you, our joist, our spar to spar, our never-ending, and our last hour where you couldn't comfort me.
I usually make works that try to facilitate welcoming and create images of freedom. Recovery to me means that I get to take time to assess where my body is. The one thing that I'm really excited about with recovery and my journey in recovery is vacation. I think that I didn't realize that getting time and space away, even though I could recover at home and with family and loved ones, there's still a process of getting away that has really restored me through my process as a dancer.
When it smells like rain, I know that you are coming. Can feel your proximity and your intentions. My world is colored by the threat and your impulses. And so I brace myself. I want to crawl back into my warm bed and remember yesterday, and there in the before, when I was able and steady on my feet, ready to run. And now, I'm not so sure. Perhaps there should be another word for depression. We've become too accustomed to the sound, the pressing together of its consonants and vowels against our tongue and teeth. There should be something more formidable in its place, for a thing that makes you forget yourself, dirties each stream you drink from, blows away the footprints of every road you have ever walked down until you become terrified that you'll never find the way back. There is no God here, or Black Jesus, and the light is hard to come by. So you walk forward, stumbling in the dark, feeling at walls that are no longer there. Because someone once told you you had to, have to, every time. Retrace your footsteps and then find the way back home.
Recovery is important because there needs to be time and space to heal and transparency. And for me to have that honesty and vulnerability and availability to have that space and consciously check in with myself of what I emotionally need, physically need, and the support I can get around me to sustain my body and my mind and my spirit.
The playground has been locked for months. A swing coughs dryly in the shade. Each night ambulances pulse through our sleep. Long white corridors crowd our dreams. Remember the scent of new grass in the park, of earth clotting in the rain? Remember the picnickers laughing beside the magnolia's soft pink lungs? Now we distrust even the breeze, and only the birds will congregate. The smallest gesture has grown grand, and from afar we've learned to love our neighbor's song. Our voices kiss the walls, because we cannot. The tulip breathes.
Recovery means rebirth and a constant regeneration. It's the up, and then it's the down, and then the getting back up. It's the rise and the fall. Those challenges are our blessings and lessons, and so the pain and the hurt is only an opportunity for us to come back stronger. And so I really appreciate recovery. I appreciate how people show up Through the act of recovery, it's an opportunity to accept the newness of every moment.
From water. Since the fall, summer's shade bristles on the canyon floor, and I must press my lips to the fault line, that fissure where each drink weeps slowly out the back of my skull. I'd like to lie, to play Moses and strike a miracle out of stone, but most days, all I can do is wander through smog and dust, trying to remember a wave's direction. I follow you now. 3 years in, and you've learned how to be in this state of lateness, this post-concussion syndrome. Like a ghost, you say. Like the soul, it never quite shows up on an MRI. But here we are, just out of focus and keeping faith. You take my arm and remind me which way to walk the fire road home. How strange to be this soft, to look down an ammonite circling into concrete and return to this question of one's final shape. The final shape will be shale, a metacarpal or two, to point the way to fossil reefs, the mollusks I imagine as ossicles listening in the rock for some hand to bridge the shores on our canyon wall. But you were never the type to walk among these alders, their coral of split gills, and find yourself in just the shallow end of eternity. Never that romantic. You know drowning is as much a predicament of time as water. Soon winter will lift the fall to its surface like a leaf on a stream, and there'll be months to stay in and write a single poem. Soon the muscle will work toward something dry and hard enough to keep, to worry the blade of a seismograph as these songs of whales held in our mountains like a breath.
Wow, that was just stunning. I'm blown away by so many things, and there's so much to unpack. But first, Paige, I want to ask you, as one of the dancers in the film, in this project, what was it like to take a poem and absorb it into your body to create a dance?
Yeah, for me, there were many inspirations. So the poem, the music, and then also an life experience. So right before filming this, I lost a relative, my sister-in-law. And so for me, I pulled from that experience her sudden passing and what that meant to me as a performing artist in a Broadway show. So there were many different things that I was able to pull from. The music, of course, was a driving force, and also the poetry and how they all just fused together. And for my solo, at least, I played around with the mirror because it was, for me, a moment of being seen and unseen.
I was especially struck by how the art forms are so synergistic and how they build on each other. Because dance and poetry and music, they're all ways of telling stories. Now we usually think in terms of stories like classic fiction with straightforward narrative lines and plots and characters. But I feel like that these art forms, in particular dance and poetry, specialize in paring down the story to its elemental emotions. Right? A poem doesn't, have a whole intro and middle and end. It just throws you right into some experience, which is, of course, part of a story. And so does dance. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about the idea of conveying a story, particularly in things that don't have a straightforward plot, like the subject of recovery.
For me, dance has always been storytelling. I've found it challenging in the past when working with certain choreographers, and the work might be task oriented, right? Or when I say task, for those that don't dance, um, it's inspired or motivated by your limbs moving, or something more visceral, internal that you're feeling versus external performance and storytelling. And I've always found myself kind of in the middle of both because I love storytelling, and that's what was so appealing about Broadway, because I'm telling a story, especially in a show like The Lion King. But then being in companies where the work was more contemporary and abstract, and at times the motive or the intent wasn't about, haha, I'm on stage and the curtain and all the glitz and glam of that, but it was more so about just being. Because you could read the words um, from one of these poems and improv to just that and how those words make you feel. Um, or it could be used in a more abstract way where you read the poem, you think about it, you connect it to something that happened in your life. So you take that emotion, and then that feeds the choreography that you create. Or some people strictly just need the music, and then they're able to go from that. So I really do think it's an individual and personal thing. Um, for me, I use all three, and that's how I tell stories.
I'm so intrigued by the role of dance in particular in recovery, and I have a personal connection to that. When I was doing my medical training at Bellevue Hospital, I ended up taking class at the Martha Graham School, and I chose Martha Graham because it was the only one that was closest to where I was training, and it was easiest to get to, and I didn't have a whole lot of time. So I just sort of stumbled in there, and it accompanied me during internship and residency, and through some very difficult moments. My day job was very intense, and there was a lot of suffering and illness and death. And then I would come to the studio, which was about beauty, but it was also about sort of finding yourself in there and finding a way to take your story. And for me, it was processing the stories of my day job. And what I loved about the evening class is, the daytime classes were a lot of professional dancers, but the evening classes were more ordinary people. People had jobs. There was a physics professor, and there are people who were teachers, and some were professional dancers too. But we brought this big variety of experiences. And I know that someone was dealing with the death of a child, and someone was dealing with, aging and the body having more difficulty moving through space. And we shared this experience with dance, and the music was so critical. And what I loved about Martha Graham is that having a live musician, a pianist, was de rigueur, and we always had a pianist. And it was a completely different experience by having that as part of this sort of way to move through. And I found it very much, I don't think I thought of it as recovery, but certainly in retrospect, I can see that it is. I recently caught up with Jessica Chen, and she's a dancer who has a remarkable story to tell about recovery. Jessica is a dancer and choreographer and the artistic director of the J. Chen Project, which explores identity and belonging through dance. And I'd love for you to hear what she has to say. I'm very pleased to welcome Jessica Chen. Our film today uses dance and poetry to explore the theme of recovery. And I know that this has a special resonance for you. Could you briefly tell us your story about dance and recovery?
Yeah, I started dance when I was 6 years old, and I've been dancing my whole life. And throughout my life, it's been the way that I process and the way that I connect with the world. And I moved to New York City, originally from Southern California, and I moved to New York City in 2006 and pursued a career in professional dance. And now I'm a professional choreographer. And in 2012, I was involved in a, a near fatal car accident. I was a passenger of a Mini Cooper convertible that flipped 3 times, landed upside down, and I was airlifted to the hospital. And I had 8 hours of brain surgery, and I spent 13 days in a drug induced coma. And I woke up with broken bones all over my body. And the big question, if I can dance again. And being a dancer, being from working in New York, it was always for me a driving point to get back on stage. So it was the here's the goal, I need to get back on stage, and that's kind of motivation to get to that. And just training in my whole life in dance, I always had that very like goal oriented mindset. And so that kicked in when I was in recovery. And on the other end, what I learned in recovery was to take time and to really be patient with myself and my body. And I wanted to also make sure that I healed correctly. At that point, I had been in the industry for 8 years or so, and I'd seen a lot of friends and colleagues who suffered injuries, and I luckily never suffered an injury in my professional career due to dance. And so, but I had that knowledge and I had that experience of others who had injuries and had to rehabilitate themselves, and examples of those that rushed the process and didn't, and then the injury then becomes an ongoing thing that you have to monitor. And then also those that took the time and really respected their body and respected the healing process. So I approached it in both ways.
That's really interesting. And now there are lots of physical modalities to help patients recover: physical therapy, occupational therapy, acupuncture. But could you talk just a little bit about the particular role of dance as part of recovery?
It is how I understood and processed the directions given to me by the doctors and the nurses and the physical therapists. So let me tell you the story. I was a few days out of the coma, and I was laying in bed. I had like a breathing tube and a feeding tube all during the coma. So there's a huge process of when you come out of sedation of like bringing your body back into activity. And so I've been laying there, and the physical therapist came in and said, "Okay, Jessica, we're gonna teach you how to sit up." And so I had a couple of loved ones in the room witnessing this, and they shared this story with me later. And so the physical therapist said, "You're going to turn on your right side, you're going to stick your feet out, and then you're going to push yourself up. And that's how you sit up." And I said, "Okay." So that's 3 moves. And what beat do you want it on? And I don't remember this. So this is like, there's no logic here. But that's what I asked them. I said, okay, 3 moves. What beat do you want it on? Like, what tempo do you want? And they looked at each other. There were two PTs there. They looked at each other, looked at my loved ones. Everybody just kind of was like shrugged. And then I offered, how about ba bum ba bum ba bum? And they were like, sure. And so that is dance is my language, and so that was translated in that moment, in a very, very real way.
Well, certainly, music plays a big role, in dance and in recovery. And I'm thinking of Oliver Sacks when he wrote his book on musicophilia, how different beats and rhythms can help different patients. Parkinson's patients are helped best with one kind of rhythm, and other
Mm,
patients with others. And I think it's no accident that the rhythm helps us, with our moving. But I think a lot of my patients who suffer from both physical and mental illnesses, there's often
mm,
a sense of being disembodied, literally,
mm,
like feeling that your body's let you down. It's not doing what it's supposed to do, and people resent, often hate their bodies. And I could see how the idea of, dance to help you, settle into your own body, can be very meaningful,
yeah,
even beyond just the physical part. And, we
yeah,
often think of dance as telling a story, which is something that resonates with those of us in the literary world. And this makes literal sense in famous plotted dance pieces like The Nutcracker and Giselle, but many dance works are, so-called plotless. And how do you create as a choreographer, or how do you find stories in dance pieces that don't have a concrete, explicit plot?
mhm. Yeah, so I'm a little unique here in that I started dance in Chinese folk dance, and all of that is storytelling, even though there's not a plot. So that's where I come from. That's how I entered dance. But in everything I do, I always start with, what story are we telling in this moment? So let's take the non literal, my contemporary work. What is this moment here? Is this an embracing moment? Is this a release moment? Is this a big moment? Is this an intimate moment? Those are all stories within the bigger story, the composition of the entire piece of, where do we want to start? Where is our middle slash climax slash maybe even low point? And then where do we want to finish? That's a once upon a time story and the end, so I'm kind of unique there, where everything I do, I'm interested in the story that it tells. But it might not have an exact narrative, but for me, I'm always pulling apart and like deconstructing, what is this moment here. So a dance move isn't just a limb moving for me.
I mean, I love your very generous description of story, and I think that really counts. And I think, in fiction, we talk a lot about character development, often distinct from
Yes.
the plot, but in fact, the character is part of what the plot is. And I think, and I see that, in dance as well, that the way the dancer embodies that moment, that the character of that moment is also creating a story. So thank you. And
Yeah.
lastly, can you tell us a bit more about the J. Chen project? What is it?
Yeah, JChin Project is a 501(c)(3) nonprofit dance company. Our mission is to create works that dive into our identities and to deconstruct what it means to belong, and to share stories, and to also share stories that are not often told.
That is really wonderful. Thank you, Jessica Chen. We look forward to seeing more from the J. Chen project.
Thank you.
Phew, that is quite, Jessica's quite a story that I think, was a little chills in my spine. I was really taken by her journey of recovery. I mean, here's someone who wasn't expected to necessarily survive, much less walk, who then is able to return to professional dance, to appear at Lincoln Center and many other notable stages. And Paige, I wonder if you could tell us a bit about what you've experienced or observed about recovery in dance or recovery with dance.
Yeah, I mean, it's so inspiring again to hear other stories of artists that have persevered after experiencing such traumatic things to their body. And it makes me reflect on when I was diagnosed with scoliosis and how traumatic that was for me, especially not having, 15, 16 years ago, the internet wasn't what it is now. We didn't have social media. There wasn't ways of like joining groups and oh, you have scoliosis, I have scoliosis. So it was very isolating for many, many years. And I always say I got really lucky with having a dance teacher, a dance director who also had scoliosis. And I think for me, that was the beginning of my recovery stage, was having someone in the front of the room who was experiencing what I was experiencing. So recovery is community. It's coming together. It's knowing you're not alone. It's embracing that, yeah, I might have this physical challenge, or I might have been through this terrible accident. Um, and but I'm not alone, right? There's many other people, and there's no one way for a dancer to look or move or create. And I think that's also what's so beautiful about this film is we all interpreted the poetry, the music, and the theme of recovery differently. I loved Jerron's interpretation of recovery, because for him, it was, yeah, we just went through this really crappy pandemic. And we realized as dancers how much we push through mentally and physically. But there's also beauty in rest. There's also beauty in taking time. There's also beauty in taking a break. And when you do all those things, you are recovering. You're recovering mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally.
And thank you for that. And I think about, all the many art forms that play a role in recovery, poetry, music, fine art, literature, where there's such a movement now to put, for example, fine art in healthcare settings, in hospital rooms, in clinics, and the hallways, and murals. And I think it makes such a difference, and I think a lot about, when BLR was first founded, our first issue came out in September 2001, really right in the wake of 9/11, and which was an incredibly traumatic time for so many people, our community, our city, the whole country. And we had planned to have this like opening gala, a big reading at Bellevue, the hospital where we were based. But of course, it didn't feel quite right to be having a gala, poetry reading, prose reading, right at the moment of this trauma. But we decided to go forth and we picked a date. All right, we'll see, maybe we'll come. And the morning of the day that we were going to have our opening was the start of the war in Afghanistan. With, okay, nobody is going to come at all. And in fact, we had standing room only. It was packed. We had more than 100 people, coming in. And it was so striking because, this was really this collective trauma, and international, and widespread. And yet people were sort of driven to come together, I think, to be in a communal setting, but to come hear poetry and fiction, and hear real people read. And there was such this spirit of like, well, where do we turn? And I think the role of art is to be there. And I think we look historically, people turn to art in moments of grief, trauma, as well as moments of joy. I mean, we have music and art at weddings and birth celebrations. But I think in particular, when we're thinking about recovery, I think art is really so critical, which leads me to introduce our last guest, who brings a very another perspective to this conversation, that of creative arts therapy. Now, many of us, and I'll confess, me included, have probably thought of creative arts therapy as the occasional, arts and crafts session that, they have at a hospital or a nursing home. It gives patients a creative outlet, it reduces stress, take their mind off their illness, have some fun. But that's not actually what creative arts therapy is, as I've learned from Milicia Ramirez, our next guest. And Milicia is a licensed creative arts therapist and a licensed mental health counselor. She is the director of creative arts therapy at Bellevue Hospital, where I work. Bellevue, as some of you know, is the oldest public hospital in the United States, going on 300 years. And for more than 30 of those years, Melissa has been championing initiatives to destigmatize mental illness and to expand access to therapeutic arts across the public health system. Um, on the side, Melissa serves on the board of the Paige Fraser Foundation in the Bronx. So please welcome Melissa Ramirez. Welcome, Melissa. And maybe you can start us off by telling us what exactly is creative arts therapy?
Certainly. Creative arts therapy is a mental health profession that uses the active engagement of the arts, music, visual arts, dance, poetry, drama, to address mental, emotional, developmental, and behavioral disorders. It uses the relationship basically between the patient and the professional therapist in the context of art making and the artistic process to really be that force of change.
So I'm curious, who are the people who become creative arts therapists? Are they artists themselves?
Well, typically to become a creative arts therapist, you complete a master's program in the creative arts therapy field. And these programs are across the nation. They're specifically in the specific respective arts, so art therapy, music therapy, drama therapy, dance movement therapy, and poetry. And you train in counseling and psychotherapy while using the respective arts and learning how to apply that in the therapy. Often, folks that enter this profession have had careers as professional artists or even teachers in the arts. And then they find that the art making process really holds lessons or holds a power and there's more to offer. And then they find the field of creative arts therapy and will earn a master's degree in that field so that they can practice. And others come to it in an interesting way where they think that they've sort of discovered something or invented something based on their experience with the arts, their personal experience. And then they wonder if there's more to it. And that's more like my origin story.
Well, actually, I was going to ask you, what is your origin story? How did you come to creative arts therapy?
Well, I used arts all my life, I think, going back just for enjoyment, but then also to just help myself through difficult times, through grief, through loss. It's very typical, and through other maybe traumatic experiences. And I thought this was unique to me. I thought this was just my way of quietly helping myself. And I think that's what interested me in psychology. And I actually learned about the profession at Bellevue when I was a psychology student. I saw a dance movement therapist in action. She was working with teenagers and it was a force to be seen. She was able to reach these kids in this really disarming, like non-threatening way, not forcing anything, just inviting them to move with her. And then she was modeling the movement in this vulnerable way, but with safety. And it got them to open up. And I was like, wait a minute. So there is another way. This is a thing. And especially it was so different from what I was learning in class. It was a very like verbal cognitive approach. And so then I explored it and I found the Expressive Arts Institute, and that's where I learned really that there were so many modes of expression and ways that you can help people heal. So fast forward 25 years later, and now I lead a department of more than 40 creative arts therapists. And it's my mission really to expand access to the creative arts and to offer opportunities to all of our patients in medical and in mental health services, because so many have never even experienced it and they can really benefit.
And how do patients come to it? Do their doctors have to recommend it? Do the creative arts therapists prowl the wards and find which patients could use it?
Creative arts therapists actually already are embedded in every psychiatric inpatient unit, on adult, adolescent, on even our forensic service. And then even on all our medical floors, we have a team of creative arts therapists that basically work on referral. They're in our outpatient programs. They work with substance use disorders. They're very much all over the hospital at the moment and continuing to expand.
It makes me think, is creative arts therapy at all involved in the push for more equity in the healthcare system? In terms of access to mental health is really unfairly or unevenly distributed. And I wonder about creative arts therapy as being a way or a manner in which we could engage more people.
Yes, absolutely. I know that one of the sort of burgeoning, research in the field is actually a right around that. Creative arts really approaches a client with cultural humility and a very non-judgmental approach, really a way to meet them where they are. And this is so important in exactly what you were saying about health equity and access to care. And so it's really a way to bring folks into the service of therapy in, like I mentioned earlier, in this non-threatening way, in a way that really has never been offered to them before. And yeah, that's part of my mission as well, is to really be able to reach those folks.
It also just sounds fun. I mean, when if you're a patient, adult or a child, I mean, something with music or dance or fine arts sounds more fun than sitting with a therapist or a physical therapist and talking about your problems or doing the exercises. Is that a part of it?
Yes, well, there's definitely a difference between using the arts therapeutically and creative arts therapy. So yes, engaging in art making is fun for art's sake. It's a way to express yourself. It can lead to self-discovery, but it's not therapy. The therapy part of it is really relational. So that's where the professional therapist comes in and the client, and they work toward client-centered goals. So a therapist could guide a patient in an individual or in a group to create art, reflect on that art, and reflect on the process, what it was like to make that art. And then there's so many lessons that can be learned in that. Then in a group dynamic, for instance, it also gives opportunities for clients to get feedback from others and to provide feedback and support to each other. So it's a way to build community. And it often looks like a lot of fun, but there's serious work going on in that room. There really is.
Yeah, it makes me think that probably many artists, as they move along their artistic careers, start to feel that within themselves, that, they're working hard at this, but may find, some path into some other psychological goals through their art form. And it's not surprising. We're interested in particular the role of dance as well as the role of literary arts in healing and recovery. And I'm wondering if you have any examples or any thoughts about those two particular arts and how they may play a role in healing.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought about this because it's such a beautiful project, this collaboration, and specifically poetry and dance are really powerful tools to pair together. They both allow an individual to express themselves creatively and connect with their emotions, and then going from one form to another, so from poetry to dance in this case, it really builds on an idea and strengthens those feelings then in the experience. The recovery process in itself essentially is storytelling, and it's making sense of life events and difficult experiences. And when we use creative arts therapy in recovery, it allows for some distance, this aesthetic distance, so you can step outside yourself and reflect on the work. And whether you're using, let's say, characters in drama therapy or images and symbols in art or metaphors in poetry, they're just safer ways to express those emotions. It's less exposing. And so in this case, poetry can be that narrative, that storytelling, and dance is the way to physically embody that. And the other thing is that poetry has a rhythm and a cadence of its own, and dance is a really great partner for that reason. The other thing is that both poetry and dance really have a connection to a sort of mindfulness and a meditative practice in a way, because it gets you to stop and to really slow down and feel your feelings, and that's really the goal of an experience like that.
One other thing I'm always intrigued by is the number of artists and musicians there are in healthcare settings. I'm interested in music, and I was doing a little exploration about doctors' orchestras. And there's a doctors' orchestra in New York, and there's one in Boston, and one in LA, and one in Jerusalem, and one in Australia and in Europe. There's only one lawyer's orchestra, and there are no accountants' orchestras. And there's no orchestras of marketers or politicians, but there are a lot of orchestras of healthcare workers. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts. Why do you think there's some overlap of arts and healthcare?
Well, at Bellevue, the creative arts therapists hold a live weekly jam session in the lobby and a dance experience where workers and visitors and patients that just walk through, they can join in. And it was born really organically out of the height of COVID, where the creative arts therapists just wanted to have a way to honor the healthcare workers and offer them a moment of comfort and hopefully joy. But through that and other wellness activities that we've provided, we have encountered so many secret, or maybe not so secret, artists, musicians, singers, dancers, all among our colleagues. We uncovered so much talent. Now, I don't know the answer to your question, why necessarily that may be, except that maybe there is this connection between healing and the healing professions and what people find in their own art making and music making.
Thank you, Melissa Ramirez. We so appreciate the work you do for our patients and our society, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you, Melissa. I am so impressed by the depth and sophistication as to how the creative arts are used in practice. It's not about having fun or doing something diverting, though it certainly can be, but it's really primarily a form of therapy, one that uses the tools of creative arts, just as a physical therapist, might use the tools of exercise or massage or ultrasound. Now, the Paige Fraser Foundation has always worked with dancers with disabilities, as you've mentioned. And, when we think about that from the outside, we probably think mostly of the physical challenges that a dancer with a disability might face. And I'm sure that physical therapists play a huge role for all dancers. But I'm wondering, why was it so important to have a creative arts therapist on your foundation's team?
We didn't only want to just offer classes and programs for dance. So the expansion led us to creating programs in music, theater, visual arts, and wellness. So we are beyond thrilled to have Melissa on our board because it allows us to bring all of our programs, whether that's Tai Chi, whether that's music. We have a music director who DJs live, right? And can now bring that into those spaces in hospitals where people are recovering and pushing through various illnesses.
And what fascinates me about Melissa's, conversation is the way that creative arts therapy goes even beyond that it's really, it's a form of mental health therapy, that that using the art as a tool, and there's many tools obviously to help people recover from trauma and from, mental health challenges. And, one could be a group therapy session, one could be an individual, there are medications, but, and I think about, when a creative artist is sort of in that zone, um, that keys into this plane of vulnerability that I think is very unique. And things happen in that spot. And I think that's why there's this magic when a great performer is on stage or is writing or playing music or dancing, that that you have this special spot. But it gets into the spot that then a creative arts therapist can kind of take advantage of that kind of moving in to help people reach, their challenges and help overcome them. Do you have any experience of being in that spot where you're just completely bared open and there's nothing that you can hide behind?
Yeah, I think for me that happens when I am improving, when things are not set, and when it's not something I'm doing every night. So when I get to improv and flow and um, not go into things with a preconceived idea of what it should turn out to be, I get really excited. And as you're talking about that sweet spot, it feels right because you're dancing on the edge. There's really nothing planned.
Well, is it ever scary when you get to that point because you sort of don't have your usual guardrails up?
I think it's scarier when everything is planned and when everything is calculated. I think it's more exciting when things are new and when things are not planned, and you kind of you go for it. You're like, well, I might fall, and how can I recover from that fall? Or he might not catch me in this lift, and how can I recover?
I'm just so impressed with the work of all the dancers in this film, the way they interpreted the works, the poetry, the music, It was just unbelievable. And this has been just wonderful. Thank you, Paige, for joining this conversation tonight. And a big thank you to Jessica Chen and Melissa Ramirez for their thoughtful contributions. A huge shout out to the hardworking folks at the Paige Fraser Foundation and Bellevue Literary Review who pulled together the many moving parts of the Reading the Body project, especially Lynn Lombardi and Lesma Fraser. A thank you to the poets whose words inspired this project, to the dancers who brought these sentiments so viscerally to the stage, to our composer who created the musical glue that brought everything together, our narrator, our ASL interpreter, our fabulous film team, and of course, you, our audience, who helped shape a possibility into a performance. Thank you all, and we'll see you at the next event. Good night.